Okay, doctor, I think we were going through your experience, and I had asked you about your residency work. You were doing some moonlighting, but the university did not consider that forensic work, correct?
Correct, and I didn't even know it was forensic work until once I became a forensic psychiatrist, and then I realized that what I was doing all that time was forensics, although we had a clinical and a forensic different experience, but yeah.
And I believe you had just testified also that when you did your fellowship, that was the first year that USF had a forensic psychiatry fellowship, correct?
Yes.
And you were the only fellow that year, correct?
Yes, I was.
And then the next year that fellowship ended, correct?
They had one other year after me, and then it fell apart after that. Yes.
And Dr. Myers was running the fellowship back in 2008 when you were there, right?
Yes, that's my mentor.
Okay. And that is the only year that you worked under the direct supervision doing forensic psychiatry, correct?
Doing forensic psychiatry?
Yep.
Yes.
And you haven't worked with Dr. Myers since about 2008 when you were in the fellowship, right?
Correct.
You have done a couple or some additional training since 2008, right, that you've listed on your CV?
I do a lot of different training, yeah. We have to, as a part of our medical license, we have to get so many hours of training every year.
You completed the Florida Forensic Examiner training program, correct?
I believe that was either within or maybe even before my forensic program.
And that was actually taught by Dr. Randy Otto, correct?
Yes, Dr. Otto taught me in my fellowship also.
Then you also did guardianship evaluator training, correct?
Yes, with Dr. Otto.
Okay. After graduation is when you started your private practice, correct?
Yes.
And kind of how you got your business going was you had at the time when you first opened, you had a secretary who had a relative in the Hillsborough State Attorney's Office, correct?
No, that was way into my practice. So I had a couple secretaries during the time that I had my practice, my freestanding office. So that wasn't until, I believe, my third secretary.
Okay. Did you previously indicate that you didn't have to advertise because of that secretary at the State Attorney's Office?
No. I advertised extensively when I very first started. I had a postcard that went out, and my secretaries before that, they went through the internet and they found, I forced them to find 100 different people to send it to every month. So that was one of their jobs that they did, and they sent that out every month. I did that for a lot of years before.
Okay. And what? So you sent out mailers at first, right?
Yes, just
And
a
then-
postcard, yes.
And then what really got work going well was when you had that secretary working at the State Attorney's Office, right?
She wasn't working at the State Attorney's Office. She had a friend or a relative that worked in the State Attorney's Office, and she was able to get me a mailing list of all the state attorneys and public defenders. So I sent a letter and a report to every single attorney, which is about 400 or so.
Your, and the patients that you see, you've kind of kept your same patient base for a while, right?
Once I had my freestanding office, it was an actual office location at Rocky Point, and I had that from 2008 to 2013, and then I transitioned my practice from that office to then telemedicine. So I chose which approximately 100 patients from my freestanding office, and I transferred them over to my telemedicine office.
And so you still, or I guess maybe not right this minute, but generally this time period you got about 100 patients that you treat, right?
Yes, I have about 100 patients still.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you agree that none of those patients suffer from psychosis, correct?
Not at this moment, but I have a couple patients that have bipolar disorder with psychotic features, and so they can get psychotic, but they have not gotten psychotic in a while since I've been treating them.
Are these new patients?
No. Well, I mean, they've been patients since my practice, and then they transitioned to my telemedicine.
Have you previously testified that none of your patients suffer from psychosis?
I have, in the sense that none of them have schizophrenia, yes.
Okay. You mentioned you, at the same time, so you started LaCoupe, but you also, you were doing some other work until you got that up and going, right?
Oh yeah, I worked full-time at another job so that way I could pay for my secretary for my practice.
And Health Integrated was one of the places that you mentioned yesterday, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned that yesterday. I don't think we talked about my work history like that. Maybe we did. I don't remember that, but I worked for Health Integrated at that time also. Yes.
Well, and that's why you have your Mississippi license, right?
Yes, I also have, yeah. That's one of the reasons why I got my Mississippi license, yes.
Like you've never lived in Mississippi and are seeing people in Mississippi, right?
No, I am not.
Okay. And your job at Health Integrated is, or was, reviewing medical practices for insurance billing, correct?
Yes, I did the medical necessity reviews for psychiatry. And so if they had a question about whether or not something was medically necessary and it got up to the point of needing a physician to review it, then I did that, yes. And I also taught the staff also.
And this is basically insurance companies trying to monitor what medications and you being like, yes, we can go ahead and cover it, or no, we're not going to cover it, kind of thing, right?
Well, not exactly, but similar, yes.
And you did not receive any training to do that job, correct?
Well, I received on-the-job training, but no, there was not a formal fellowship or anything to do medical necessity reviews. That was a on-the-job training kind of review.
Well, and on the job, you're working remotely though, right?
No.
Relevance?
Experience in the field? I wasn't asked to proffer initially.
I'm answering
Oh, I'm sorry. You were not like physically in Mississippi doing this billing, right?
No, that was actually just one of the clients that Health Integrated had. I was physically in the building of Health Integrated, but insurance companies are all over the United States, so there was different companies for different states, and I would do the medical necessity criteria for each different state. Specifically, Mississippi requires a license for that. Sometimes states don't. Texas is another one. I already had a Texas license since I went to medical school in Texas.
And so, but as part of that job, you're not evaluating, you're not touching the people. You're reviewing records and making recommendations to the insurance companies.
I'm actually calling the physicians also, or calling the staff there. So the patient's in the hospital, and then their case may come up for review, and then I would actually call the hospital and say, may I speak with a physician regarding this patient, and then I would actually speak with them about the patient and have a back and forth kind of conversation with them, as well as getting the medical records from the hospital, as well as also getting, like, they had some actual staff in the hospital as well, and so then they would report to me. So I had several different pieces of data going on at the same time.
All right. And you also told the jury yesterday about running a competency working at a competency restoration program out in Texas, right?
Yes, in San Antonio.
And now, as part of this, you were not doing competency training, correct?
Training other people on competency criteria? Is that what you asked?
Trying to restore people to competency.
Yes, that is part of the job.
Well,
Competency restoration, as well as treating patients for competency restoration, but also treating patients that have been already deemed not guilty by reason of insanity, and they got released out into the community, and I was treating them.
Okay. Let's back up a little bit. What is the difference between a competency evaluation and an insanity evaluation?
Well, there's a big difference between the two.
Okay.
Competency evaluation, I'm just asking criteria for competency. So that's a very small scope. just asking, can they work with their attorney? Well, first finding out their diagnosis. And due to that, then, can they work with their attorney? Can they display appropriate courtroom behavior? And all the different competency criteria, make sure that the person gets up to that level of competency.
What are the rest of the criteria?
Objective relevance.
Under the umbrella of experience.
So the competency criteria, whether or not they can work with their attorney, whether or not they can, and that would be able to know the specific facts of the case, whether or not they can participate. Trying to think about every single criteria. I'm sorry, I don't know every single demarcated criteria. Now, it's also in Texas is a little bit different, but
In every single criteria, there's 6 criteria, correct?
okay, 6 criteria.
I'm sorry, you said you were unable to state the 6 competency criteria?
I don't know them right offhand. I was doing a clinical evaluation, so I don't know them right offhand, and I don't know if they're different from Texas, but I know some of the criteria, but I couldn't tell you right offhand every single one right now. I wasn't prepared for that.
Okay. Then, well, let me ask you this.
Yes.
Your job doing competency restoration, the restoration you were doing, you were just prescribing medication.
I was prescribing medication to the patients, and I was treating them for the mental illness, and then I had a staff that actually did the competency restoration training and also went out into the field to make sure they were getting their medications and making sure that they were maintaining their appointments and things.
And so your take on that, though, is you just have to treat psychosis so that somebody can become competent.
Well, no, that's not the only thing. I mean, that's not the only reason why some people are not competent to proceed is psychosis.
Have you previously testified that your role in restoring competency is to prescribe medication to get rid of psychosis?
Well, that's part of it. I wouldn't doubt that I said that. That's part of the treatment for sure, for some of the patients.
And as far as actually doing the work with a defendant regarding their understanding of the legal system, that you were not doing, correct?
I was not doing the training, no.
Now, you also did not receive any training. Now, although you're doing this job, you did not receive any training to do that job, correct?
Which job?
Competency restoration.
I didn't have any specific competency training that I can recall outside of just maybe speaking with Dr. Myers about it or maybe reading some about it, but I wasn't involved in a clinic or anything like that, no.
And in fact, your position is that you don't really need any special training, you just kind of understand the pieces and do your job, right?
I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I don't know exactly what that answer was, what the question was that I gave that answer to, but...
Did you previously testify to that under oath?
I have no idea. I don't know what that question was.
Would it refresh your recollection to review transcript of a deposition you did in January of 2017?
Okay.
Johnson, page 22. May I first witness, Judge?
Yes.
And that was regarding whether somebody had actually trained you directly to do competency restoration, correct?
Yeah, she asked who taught me how to do competency restoration. That was the question.
And you indicated that nobody really taught you, it's just kind of something you figure out, right?
Well, I did say that, and that is sort of true. A lot of my job is on-the-job training, and they give the criteria, and then you go through that with each patient when you're seeing them.
And the job that you had there was at, or doing the competency training, or competency restoration, I'm sorry, that was also telepsychiatry, correct?
Yes, that was telepsychiatry.
You were never actually in the hospital, correct?
No, that wasn't, and that, when we're talking about that, that was actually an outpatient clinic.
No, I'm talking about the competency. At North Texas?
Oh, that's competency, I'm sorry, I did competency restoration in 2 different places.
Okay.
So is this, you're talking about right now in the hospital?
Right.
Okay.
And you did not go to the hospital?
I was not at North Texas, I was actually in Tampa doing that via telemedicine.
And so your role there, well, let's discuss what that hospital was. That's out in Texas, right?
Yes.
And that would be for criminal defendants who have cases pending, right?
Yes.
And the court has found them incompetent and sent them to this place, right?
Yes.
And so they stay there unless and until restored to competency to go back and deal with their charges, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And your position was, well, while you were there, you would, well, I guess 33 to 40% of the people that were sent to that hospital under court order of incompetency, you personally felt were totally fine.
That sounds like a decent number. Yeah.
And so your position was that 33 to 40% of those people that were sent there court ordered were malingering, right?
Of the patients that I saw, yes.
And you agree, though, that the people at the hospital have eyes on somebody and is better adept to making that call, correct?
Oh yeah, I have had a whole team there. People that saw them 24 hours a day. I had a team there, and I saw them every day, and I did a treatment team meeting with them every day. I spoke with them all day long. I mean, we're on a computer screen and we can talk back and forth. So yes, and I took all of their input into consideration. Yes.
And the people at the hospital, they have the benefit of having 24-hour, 7-day-a-week observation of this person, right? Whereas the court might not.
Oh yeah.
Then you also worked in an NGRI clinic, right?
Yes.
And the people there, you indicated that they were people that were released into the community, right?
Correct.
And there were also people there that had been committed to that facility, right?
Yes.
There you were, now as you're in your role at the NGRI clinic, you are not conducting NGI evaluations as you have in this case, correct?
That is correct, yes. I'm a treating provider only.
Right,
Yes.
you are just providing the medication, right?
Well, in psychotherapy, yes.
And you are, again, this is not a face-to-face contact, walk in the halls of the hospital. You're meeting with them over the computer, right? Telepsychiatry. I'm
meeting with them, and again, I had a team there. So yes, I'm meeting with them as actually a nurse in the room. Yeah, that's how it was.
And you did not receive any training in doing NGRI evaluations as part of that employment, right?
That's correct.
In fact, you've never been employed in a capacity where you were doing NGRI evaluations, right? Other than for yourself.
Yes.
Fair to say you have a strong position that you do not want to work for anybody else.
Well,
Objection, that's irrelevant, Your Honor. Reproach it.
Yes.
I don't remember exactly how I worded my question, but
I
fair to
don't
say,
like to work for other people.
right, you have a pretty strong sense of not wanting to work for other people.
I like to be independent, but obviously I have worked for other people because I've had all these other jobs, working in the prison and the jail and health integrated and at USF. I've worked at a lot of different places, but I prefer to work for myself. Yeah.
Fair to say you don't want to be in a position where somebody else is telling you how to do your job.
I don't like people to tell me how to do my job. Yes, that's right.
And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about those jail jobs. You had said that you were chief psychiatrist at a couple places.
Yep.
Now, Dr. Hernandez over at the county jail,
Yes.
you're familiar, well, you're aware that he works at the jail like 5 days a week, right?
I don't know what his schedule is, but I do know he works there. Yeah.
That was not your role in those facilities, right?
No, that was my role.
Well, you would show up about once a week, right?
Right, because I guess they were smaller jails than this one.
Okay.
So yes, and in the capacity that I have been working, they put all of my patients on one day, and I just worked like a 10-hour day or something. Yeah.
And when the chief psychiatrist, it's an on-call job, right?
Typically, yes, it is.
So whoever is on call that night is the chief psychiatrist, right?
Well, I don't know if whoever's on call that night is the chief psychiatrist. I mean, it's different people are on call. I mean, we're doctors and different people are on call. So I don't know if Dr. Hernandez, I don't know what his schedule is. I don't know if he's on call or if he has other people take call. I really don't know.
Okay. And so you never worked in a jail or prison or state hospital facility where you walked in the door every day, walked out the door every day, came back the very next day over an extended period of time, right?
Well, at the prison I did. I walked there and I worked in there. I would do that on my vacations and my breaks, so I would be there for weeks at a time, but not for years at a time, but for weeks at a time between, when I got a vacation from my actual job, then I would work there. So I would be there for weeks at a time.
What is the APA?
The American Psychiatric Association?
Yes.
The American Psychiatric Association.
And you are not a member, correct?
I'm not a member of the American Psychiatric Association.
Okay. You disagree with their policies, right?
Some of them, yes.
You agree that it is the largest governing body for psychiatrists, correct?
Yes, I mean, it's the American Psychiatric Association.
And the American Psychiatric Association is who actually published the DSM, correct?
Yes.
You are not a member of the American Medical Association, correct?
Correct.
You are not board certified in forensic psychiatry, correct?
No, that's not correct.
Are you board certified? Who are you board certified by?
The National Board of Physicians and Surgeons.
All right, so let's break this down a little bit.
Okay.
There is American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, right?
APBN, yes.
And APBN offers board certification across for psychiatry and neurology, right?
Yes.
And then there are subsets or specialties of psychiatry that you can also be certified in, correct?
Subspecialties, yeah.
Okay. And your position is that, okay, so you, in order to be board certified, you, through the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons, you have to first have board certification through the ABPN.
Correct.
The organization that you were board certified through is a grassroots organization, correct?
Yes, it was developed by physicians. Yep.
And that certification is based on you being certified through the ABPN, correct?
Correct, to take the original boards and be board certified through them, yes.
And, well, and you testified in deposition that ABPN and...
Questions of hearsay. Proper impeachment.
All right, now approach.
So the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology,
Yes.
not equivalent to the organization that you are board certified through, correct?
I wouldn't say that, no.
So you're saying, I'm sorry, they are equivalent or not equivalent?
I would say that they are equivalent in terms of being board certified. They are not equivalent in the terms of the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons does not do the initial board certification. They only do maintenance of certification. Sort of two different things, but the original board certification where you have to take the exam and sit for the exam and do the oral boards, that's the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. I did those boards. And the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons requires that to become board certified through that organization.
All right. So, and let's talk about, so the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology has extensive requirements to keep up your board certification, right?
Well, for psychiatry, it requires a recertification exam, and that we have to do CMEs or continuing medical education, which we have to do for our licenses anyway. So,
And it requires the exam every 10 years, right?
correct, recertification.
Whereas the organization you have gotten board certified through does not require you to do any additional exams, correct?
Correct, they only require you to do the continuing medical education.
And the the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons, this was established in 2015,
I don't know when it was originally established.
does not offer the initial certifications to psychiatrists, correct?
They do not offer initial certifications for any physician, no.
Okay. And so you testified that they are equivalent agencies.
Well, they're equivalent board certifications, yes.
You would agree that you are currently involved in a lawsuit suing the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology based.
Relevancy.
Councilman?
Involved in a lawsuit in which you are suing the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, correct?
I'm a named plaintiff in the lawsuit, yes.
And as part of that lawsuit, you are asking for damages to be awarded based on loss of employment from not having their certification, correct?
I don't believe, that is not the purpose of why I'm involved in that lawsuit.
You would agree that you are asking for damages, correct?
I do not know that I'm asking for damages, no.
Would it refresh your recollection to take a look at the petition that's been filed?
I can.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
I don't know that it's asking for damages. I don't know where that is.
You can look as much as you want. I think that's-
Okay.
Asking for to be awarded damages to the maximum extent allowed under federal antitrust laws, right?
What I was asking for is for them to accommodate pregnant and breastfeeding women. That was the reason for my complaint, because they would not allow me to sit for the boards because they would not make an accommodation for me breastfeeding.
Well, actually, they did make an accommodation for you, right?
No, they didn't. They didn't.
Did you? Is it alleged in the petition that they offered you to come test in different intervals?
No, they did not. What they did was they said that it was not considered a medical necessity for me to be able to lactate when I was scheduled to every 3 hours. They said it was a comfort care thing that they would allow, but I would have to go find a testing center that would actually allow me to do it. And when I got there, they didn't necessarily need to accommodate me.
Now, do you need a moment?
No, I'm fine.
So when you were actually supposed to sit for the exam back in October of 2017, right?
Yes, but that's when I was pregnant. Yeah.
And you asked them for a medical extension and they granted it to you, right?
Yes, they did.
And then you were offered a professional courtesy to treat the request as a comfort aid.
Objection, Judge.
You can move on.
rise, kneel up.
So because you do not have the ABPN board certification, you can't do telepsychiatry, correct?
I can do telepsychiatry, but the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons, as you said, is a new agency. So many insurance companies have not come to accept that certification yet as a basis for billing. So Medicare and Medicaid, which is what pays for the patients in the not guilty by reason of insanity clinic, they do not recognize the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons yet as a governing body because it's too new. And so, yes, that is the reason that ultimately I stopped doing telepsychiatry for them, because I was running that clinic, and because it's Medicare and Medicaid, that was how they billed. So they couldn't bill for my services.
And also with most hospitals do not accept the board certification that you have to give you rights to the hospital either, right?
Many hospitals, yes.
But prior to that happening, you have long since retired any rights to a hospital, right?
Yes.
You don't have practicing rights to any hospital in the area and haven't for a little while now, right?
Right. The last one I was in is Tampa General, but I can still teach there, but I don't actually see patients or bill there.
And getting medical malpractice insurance without the ABPN board certification is also difficult, right?
I have my medical malpractice insurance, so I don't know how difficult it is. I know I have my malpractice insurance.
Did you allege in request for damages that you had difficulty with that?
No, not that I know of.
Now, so the board certification that you're relying on then is different than the board certification that Dr. Michael Mayer has, correct?
Objection, that's irrelevant to that particular. Objection, also voice
I believe Dr. Maris was grandfathered in. I don't believe he's under the same board certification requirements as I have been from the PBN. I believe he doesn't even have to take recertification.
Dr. Mayer is board certified, though, through the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, correct?
Yes, but he has different parameters based upon his age.
Okay. How long he's been doing the job, right?
Well, I think they changed the recertification process since I was a resident. So, and I don't know exactly when that year was, but physicians prior to a certain year, they never have to take a board certification exam after the first one because of when they were certified. And now, even people that are getting certified after their initial boards now, they have gone away from board certifications to just now doing the continuing medical education. So it has evolved over time. I just so happen to be in that one of those years where that was one of their requirements.
So when you got your board certification, that's in 2008, right when you graduate, right?
I got my initial board certification, I believe, in 2007 because it came up for renewal in 2017. My forensics I got in 2009. So I was certified through the APBN through December of this year. But since I didn't sit for that initial certification, they took away my board certification, even though I had met all the requirements and took the exam.
Right. So fair to say, though, you got your certification before you had to do any, or before you did any work outside of your fellowship.
I was board certified in general forensic psychiatry while I was in my fellowship.
Right.
Yes.
And in order to get that board certification, you did not have to prove that you did any forensic evaluations, correct?
To do general boards, it has nothing to do with forensics.
And for your forensic psychiatry one, though, you don't have to prove any that you did any individual evaluations, right?
You have to have completed a fellowship in forensic psychiatry and have passed the board certification exam to become board certified in forensic psychiatry, which I did.
Right. You are a member of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law, correct?
Yes.
And Apple has guidelines for conducting forensic evaluations, correct?
Yes.
And they have guidelines, ethical guidelines in conducting evaluations, correct?
Yes.
And fair to say at the time you did Mr. Jonchuck's evaluation, you were not even aware that those guidelines existed, correct?
I was aware that they existed. I actually did a lecture in July of 2007 about it, but I had forgotten that in the deposition when you asked me that question.
Okay. So you agree in the deposition I asked you what their ethical requirements are, right?
Yes.
And you indicated that you didn't even know that they had them, so you wouldn't be able to tell me what they were, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you had previously taught on them, is what you're saying?
Well, I didn't, I mean, that was a while back, but yes, I did. And again, it's just part of our training, and I'd forgotten that specifically that I had done that, but I did do that, and I'd forgotten that.
And also, you mentioned of teaching. You have never taught for money, correct? Like, you've never been a professor, a paid professor, right?
I'm not, well, that's not true. I mean, at my master's program, I did teach. And also at Health Integrated, I teach and I get paid for that, but not at a university. I'm not a university professor that gets paid. I'm a free university professor at the medical school.
And just to be clear, right, any lectures that you give at USF are through the medical department, not through the psychiatry department, correct?
No, that's not correct. I've trained our residents in the residency program. Now, I don't know what they consider that, but if the Department of Psychiatry calls me and says, hey, Dr. Lazaro, we want you to be an examiner for their boards, I'm considering that them asking me to be an examiner for their board. So I'm considering that from the Department of Psychiatry. I don't know exactly if there's something else, that some other thing, but that's how I have been asked.
You are not currently doing any lectures here in last 6 months a year or future 6 months a year. You are not set up to do any lectures at USF for psychiatry, correct?
Well, I'm not saying I'm not in the future. I'm saying I haven't in the past year or so. Yes, you're right.
Okay. And you indicated that you are, well, you, I believe, have on your CV or testified that you worked as an adjunct professor at USF?
Yes. I don't know if I testified to that, but yes, I have.
Okay. And that was probably about 6 months, maybe a year, right?
That specific appointment, that title, yes. But I've been teaching there since my residency.
Well, and you indicated that you didn't want to be an adjunct professor because you didn't want to be somewhere where someone else would tell you what to do, correct?
I didn't want to be a full professor, and yes, me and my the department head, we had that discussion. I didn't like him to tell me what to do. Yeah.
You have never been paid to teach at USF, right?
No.
It's been asked and answered.
All voluntary.
When was the last time you volunteered to teach in the psychiatry program?
I don't know. I don't remember when the last time was.
Do you remember the last time you did a volunteer lecture in the psychiatry department?
No, I don't. I mean, that would have been the same answer. No, I don't remember it.
Okay. And you indicated that you had published one paper, I believe, yesterday, right?
I've published 3 papers.
Okay.
But one that I specifically, well, I actually talked about 2 yesterday, but.
And specifically regarding psychotic individuals, you contributed one case study to one paper, correct?
I wrote about that one case I talked to you guys about yesterday, yes. It was a clinical case study.
And you did not actually write any part of that finished article, right?
No, that's not true.
Did you previously testify in deposition that you did not actually write any part of the actual finished article?
No, I did not say that.
Or page 94. I'm showing you your depo transcript from Stanford versus Sean Johnson that was taken in January 2017 again.
Okay. So we're talking about the sexual sadism article. I thought you were talking about the leech therapy article. Which article were you talking about?
How many articles have you been a part of?
I've published 3 articles.
And the manufacturing methamphetamine?
Crystal meth, I wrote that article completely.
So that has nothing to do with psychosis, right?
No, it's a medical thing.
Okay.
And then the auto amputation of the penis,
Okay.
that's the psychotic one.
Okay.
And I wrote that one completely.
Okay.
And then this one is talking about sexual sadism.
Okay. So the sexual sadism one is Dr. Meyer's paper.
Dr. Myers, I contributed to it, but I didn't write the finished article, no.
Okay. And is this not the same one that you said you just wrote one case about? You wrote about one case?
The auto amputation of the penis case, I wrote about that one case.
In this, the sexual sadism or whatever that you're referencing from 2008,
Yes.
you indicate that you wrote about one person and you submitted it.
I'm the one that researched one of the different 22 offenders that we then put into this paper. Yes.
Okay. And so you looked at one person to write some information for the article, correct?
I didn't just look at one person. One person I was solely responsible for. There's 22 other people in that. I mean, there's 21 other people in that article.
And that was from 2008, correct?
Correct. I said I didn't write any part of the actual finished article. I wrote the part about this particular case. Yes.
And then you gave it to the doctor to do it. It's his paper, not yours, right?
Well, I'm a contributing author on it, but Dr. Myers is the lead author on the paper.
Okay. And so the last time that you published any literature in the field was in 2008?
Yes.
You indicated that you teach where?
At Health Integrated.
Have you previously testified that you've never been paid to teach anybody?
Well, I was meaning at the medical school. Until you just now said it, I mean, I pay to teach at Health Integrated. That's my job.
When you went to evaluate John, well, actually, one of the, you had testified on direct that John had no emotion when you were talking to him, right?
He didn't have emotion, no.
What about your mood, John? How are you feeling emotionally? Where are you at emotionally right now? Where are you?
Thinking about
How is your overall mood, though? How are you feeling emotionally? There's one thing about your thoughts, but how are you feeling internally?
just sad.
What do you exactly feel sad about?
About being
About what about?
she's not here.
And what about you makes you feel sad about?
Because I was a really good father. And she loved me so much that I always promised that I would never let anything happen to her. And I did.
So do you feel sad that you are the reason why she's not here?
Yes.
Okay. That's appropriate. That's what you should feel. That's right, the right thing to feel. Why did you start feeling that, Tom? Because I don't get that impression all the time, like reading and stuff about you. I don't get that impression a lot that you do think of that. Is that a wrong impression that I have, or tell me about that?
I think about her every night. And in the morning when we wake up, I still have bad dreams where I think that she's not even next to me and I wake up. This is really bad. Thank you.
That's also appropriate. That's a normal reaction. And that's a good thing that you had that reaction. I just wish you had that reaction before it was happening.
My mom wouldn't think that night, but she wanted to stay with me. She's fine. My mom had to take her. I just wish that she would.
So do you think if that happened, John, that she would still be here now?
Somebody would have to make her active by then.
Doctor, going back to the beginning of that evaluation when you
Yes.
were sitting there setting up. We got into a little bit. I had asked you about some records. Now at this point, this is before you talked to any collateral witnesses, right? And
This day?
I'm sorry, yeah, on day one.
Yes.
And that was before you had reviewed those depots that we went through
Yes.
before. Okay. And you asked the state, or you had indicated what information you thought would be very important to review, correct?
I spoke with them about some things that I wanted them to see if they could get.
Okay. And what you thought was very important that you needed to review was the DCF records from when John was a kid, right?
Yes.
And you thought that the state needed to reach out to an old friend of John's named Amanda, right?
Yes, I wanted information about Amanda as well as Melody and as well as medical records from when he was younger. Yes.
And Amanda, you wanted them to reach out to her, even though she's drugged out of her mind half the time, right?
Well, I don't know if I said exactly that, but the one call that I received, and I believe that she's on, I believe she was intoxicated on that call.
Would it refresh your recollection to know if you made the statement, even though she's drugged out of her mind half the time, to review the transcript?
You can give that to me. It doesn't sound like anything that I wouldn't say, but you could give that to me.
May I first witness it?
Yes, even though she's drugged out of her mind half the time, she's a key person because she's close to him. Yep.
And Melody Dishman, you thought that was another person you needed to speak to, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, obviously, Melody Dishman, they were friends at 12 and 13, right?
Well, they were best friends, yep.
And then after a few years, they didn't talk for like 6 years, right?
Yeah, they had some type of falling out or some kind of dissociation, and then they sort of met back up, I believe, in a gas station or something.
Okay, so it was like his middle school best friend.
Yeah, but he didn't go to school beyond middle school, really.
Right, but during his high school years and up to, I think, 19, they didn't have any contact at all, right?
That's correct.
And then there was another couple year period that they didn't talk also, correct?
I believe that they were in and out, yeah.
Okay. But that was what you thought was important to see.
Well, because she knew him for a while, and when I did speak with her, it was definitely a good person to speak with.
All right. Now, you did not believe John about that he has a spinal cord stimulator, right?
No, I believe he has that. It was implanted. It's in his medical history.
I'm sorry, you doubted that he really had seizures.
I don't believe he has seizure disorder. No.
Okay. And I believe you testified yesterday that you had reviewed records that suggested he did not have seizure disorder.
Well, I reviewed records that said that he had had EEGs in the past to look for seizure disorder, and they were negative. Yes.
Did you notice the records that indicated he had had the EEG done that did indicate seizure activity?
No. Which record is that?
Looking at Dr. Arthur's records.
Okay.
September 13th of 2013. You'd agree there's a note? Okay. You'd agree there's a note, had more seizures with an arrow to Florida Hospital, correct?
Yes.
He thinks it was stress, correct?
Yes.
He's on gabapentin and Keppra, correct?
Yes.
EEG, bad with strobe lights, correct?
I don't see that.
Turn the page.
Oh. Yeah, I do see that.
So there was, in fact, at least one abnormal EEG, right?
Well, I don't know what the EEG actually said, and I don't know where this is from because he has MRIs and CTs, the actual studies in his notes and his records, but I don't see a report of the EEG that says that it's bad with strobe lights. I don't know if this is a self-report from John or where this is coming from.
Well, there's a note that says Florida Hospital, right?
It has a little arrow to Florida Hospital, but it doesn't have anything else about that.
So your position, though, is you see a note in a doctor's record that says EEG bad with strobes, and your assumption is that that never happened.
No, that's not my assumption that it never happened. I guess what I'd be looking for is, like the CT and the MRI, I'd be actually looking for the report on that actually confirmed that, and that wasn't just a self-report.
And also now, if they were to, if you do an EEG and somebody isn't having a seizure, it could show up perfectly normal, right? In fact, it almost always would show up perfectly normal unless somebody is just coming, either having the seizure or just finished having the seizure, right?
No, that's not true.
Okay. John was going to a neurologist, right?
He saw a neurologist a couple times, yes. I believe 3 times.
And was on medication, right?
Yes. It was prescribed medication. I don't know if he was taking it, but he was prescribed medication.
Seizure medication, right?
Yes.
And in Bora's records, they also indicate that he was having ongoing seizures, correct?
That he's reporting seizures. Yes, she's documenting that he's reporting seizures to her.
And she's documenting that when she increased his seizure medication, he hadn't had any in a little while, right?
So after his first appointment, then he comes back a month later and said he had had another seizure. She had started the medication. And then she then added another medication. Said to follow up in 3 months. And in that also she reports that he said that he had another seizure. So I don't know that for sure. What you said, I don't know that that's supported in these records.
And also in those records, they indicate that Mr. Jonchuck was self-pay at the time, right?
I don't know that they say that. I know that he told me that.
May I first witness, Judge?
Oh, I see it right here. Yeah, insurance self-pay on the top. Yeah.
You indicated that John, that you believed he's malingering based on when he would tell you he didn't remember things, right?
Yes.
Okay. You asked him about his mental health history as a child, right?
Yes.
And he admitted that he was going to the crisis center, right?
Yes.
And that, so he remembered some of his mental health history, right?
Oh, yeah.
He didn't remember who he was living with at certain times in his life, right? As a kid.
Well, I mean, he was back and forth a little bit. That story was a little choppy, yeah.
And he didn't remember living with his uncles when he was little. He just remembered that his family had told him he was living with his uncles when he was little, right?
I don't remember that specifically, but I wouldn't say that didn't happen.
And it was hard for him to figure out the timeline of when he was living with certain relatives, right?
Yes.
He wasn't sure what age he had started school, right?
Oh, he told me he started at age 6.
Well, he eventually got to 6. He told you initially he wasn't sure, right?
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay. So fair to say that John had problems remembering fairly innocuous things as well.
I don't know. It depends on what you consider innocuous.
And you, well, your position is that psychosis does not affect somebody's memory, correct?
No, that's not my position. It can affect people's memory. It affects people's cognition as a part of that illness.
Have you previously testified that psychosis does not creates no problems in storing or recalling memories?
I don't know what the actual context of what I was speaking about. It may have been acute memory. I don't really know what that was that I was talking about.
Okay. Let's look at your depo.
All right.
Page 57.
Was it in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
You said that if somebody changes their story, that's going to lead you to believe they're not telling the truth, right?
Well, we have to go up a little bit further. But I did say that is the beginning of one paragraph, but it was sort of a part of a big answer.
Well, right. And then your position is because John's recollection of what happened in these days is spotty or not consistent across everybody, right?
Well, if it's different among every different provider in one way or another, yeah, that gives you a question because psychosis doesn't affect your memory like that. I mean, you're going to have a memory for the event, just like if you weren't psychotic, you'd have a memory for the event. And if you would remember the event, you're not going to add new facts to it when speaking with some people and then add different facts to it when speaking with others.
And so your position is that if somebody is telling the truth, the story is always going to be the same.
Yes.
Whether or not they're psychotic or whether or not they have dementia or not.
Well, that's a little bit different.
Well, that's what you said, right?
That is what I said.
Under oath, right?
Yeah, that is what I said. I'm surprised that I said that. Dementia is a little bit different. It depends when the story was. If somebody has dementia, it does.
And your position is that, well, that you are not going to be floridly psychotic one day and then not the next, right?
Yes.
And John was actually floridly psychotic for months, right?
Wrong.
You disagree that John was experiencing psychosis at the jail.
I disagree with that, yes.
You disagree with Dr. Hernandez's opinion that Mr. Jonchuck has a severe mental illness. Correct?
Yes, if he says that he has a severe mental illness, I do disagree with that.
You disagree that Mr. Jonchuck was floridly psychotic for months at the state hospital, right?
I totally disagree with that, yes.
You disagree with the state hospital diagnosis that Mr. Jonchuck suffers from a severe mental illness, correct?
Yes. Yes, I do.
You disagree with Dr. Michael Mayer that Mr. Jonchuck suffers from a severe mental illness, correct?
Yes, the psychotic disorder NOS diagnosis, yes.
You disagree with Dr. Randy Otto that Mr. Jonchuck suffers from a severe mental illness, correct?
Yes.
You disagree with Dr. Scott Mackless that Mr. Jonchuck suffers from a severe mental illness, correct?
I disagree that he suffers from bipolar disorder type 1. Yeah, with psychotic features, yes.
You disagree with Dr. Peter Burston that Mr. Jonchuck suffers from a severe mental illness, correct?
Yes, I believe he gave the same diagnosis. I disagree with that, yes.
And you've made a lot of statements about how psychosis works, right?
Yes.
And your position is that psychosis affects every person the same way, right?
Well, no, I mean, people have different hallucinations and different delusions, but it does affect people. The primary symptoms are the same, which is how they've been able to classify them in the DSM-5. If they were all different, they would be able to classify them. So there's categories of symptoms, and people can express them in different ways. But there are certain things that are not psychotic symptoms. Yes.
Well, let me ask you this. Is your position that every person responds to psychosis the same way?
Not every person manifests psychotic symptoms in the same way, no.
Have you previously testified under oath that every person responds to psychosis the same?
I don't believe I would say that.
Page 113 of the deposition. Line 8. Question. When you say that you can't, are you saying every single person responds to psychosis the same way?
Objection.
Can I
What's
read?
the objection?
I don't believe that's impeachment.
Well,
She just said she didn't say it under oath.
Approach.
said a number of times over the last 2 days, that's not how psychosis works. That's not how psychosis works, right?
Yes.
Now, I've asked you a couple times now for any literature you could direct me to that supports your position, correct?
That supports my position that you can't be floridly psychotic and kill your child at 1 minute and the next minute be totally fine?
That, and that everybody experiences it the same. I asked you for that too, right?
I didn't say that if you continue with these questions, it's not that I said that every person responds to psychosis the same. I did not say that.
And that, well, a couple of statements regarding how you said that that's not how psychosis works, right?
Yes.
I asked you on August 30th if you had any literature for me, right?
Correct.
I asked you again in September if you had any literature for me, right?
Yeah, you did in a very sarcastic tone. Yep.
And you were up here all last week, right? You didn't bring me any literature still, right?
No.
Okay. You mentioned the DSM when you were just describing. You said something about the way psychosis works and referenced the DSM, right?
I don't know what the exact thing was, but what I said is in the DSM there are different symptoms, and those symptoms have a specific definition, and it goes through all the different types of symptoms.
Okay. Now, we've talked a lot about what the DSM is. Fair to say that the DSM is not something that guides your decision making in any way, shape, or form.
That's right. This does not control what I do or what I think about somebody. It's a guideline, and that's what it's meant to be. It's a clinical guideline. It's so that we as clinicians can talk amongst each other about what we think is going on with somebody. It doesn't tell you directly that you have to do this, this, or this. So in that way, I'm saying it doesn't tell me what to do. I utilize it for the reason that it was developed.
Well, and not that it doesn't tell you what to do, that it doesn't guide your decision making in any way, shape, or form either.
Section of questions to ask and answer just now.
The DSM does not have any medical treatment guidelines, and it doesn't inform or guide what I do clinically with patients, no.
All right. As evidenced by your diagnoses not being diagnoses from the DSM, right?
No.
Okay.
If there was a diagnosis that he actually met the criteria for that was in the DSM-5, he would have it.
All right. Now, as to the malingering, there are a number of tests that are available to test for malingering, correct?
Oh, yes.
And you brought a whole stack of them with you both days you met with Mr. Jonchuck, right?
I brought several, yes.
And you didn't administer a single one, did you?
No, I didn't.
You did not administer a memory test either, correct?
No, I didn't.
Okay. You testified yesterday that there was no evidence that John's mother was using drugs while she was pregnant with John, right?
John told me that, and she told me that.
Okay, well, to be fair, John would not have any independent knowledge of that, right? We can all agree.
Oh, but he told me that. I mean, so I'm going with that, and his mom also said that she didn't.
Okay. You you indicated that, well, when John was a child, his mother said that the doctor actually drug tested him to try to see if his mom was giving him drugs, right?
Or if he was exposed to any drugs in the environment that he could have had access to, yes.
And if there were testimony suggesting that his mother had been using drugs when she was pregnant, would that affect any of your opinions?
Well, if my opinion is that she wasn't using drugs, and John and her also said that, but then if somebody else, like a medical doctor, or she had tox screens done while she was pregnant, then yes, obviously that would change my opinion about that.
You brought up yesterday that John had been in trouble with some check printing kind of fraud.
I wasn't allowed to elaborate on that. I just talked about a printer, and that was where it stopped.
Yeah, that's what you said. And to be clear, John denied that, right?
In my interview with him?
Mm-hmm.
He denied any wrongdoings, yes.
Well, John doesn't have any criminal conviction for this, right?
He doesn't, no.
John was never arrested for this, right?
No, he wasn't.
There's no police report that suggests John was being investigated for this, correct?
Correct.
John believing that Phoebe was a demon, you do not see as a sign of psychosis, correct?
I do not see that that was a delusion, no.
Okay. John seeing Phoebe as lethargic with dilated pupils while everybody else indicates she looks normal, not any sign of psychosis, correct?
I believe he's reporting that, yeah. But I don't believe that that report is a sign of psychosis, no.
Thinking John and Phoebe were possessed, not a sign of psychosis, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Thinking Phoebe was possessed and that's why he had to get that Bible, not a sign of psychosis, right?
I don't believe he really thought that, no.
Hearing the Bible knock, not a sign of psychosis, right?
I don't believe he heard that.
Believing the people in the jail were reading his mind, not a sign of psychosis, correct?
No, I don't believe that.
Seeing images over his left eye, not a sign of psychosis, right?
That is not a sign of psychosis, no.
Hearing derogatory and bad voices, not a sign of psychosis, correct?
No, not in this case.
Believing his cousin was reading his mind and that was telling him he was going to hell, not a sign of psychosis, right?
I believe he reported that. I don't believe that that's a sign of psychosis, no.
I have nothing further, Judge.
Okay. Read it out.
Yeah, just a moment here.
Sure.
We have no redirect.
Should Dr. Lazaro be on standby?
Questions, jury man questions?
That's what I've been waiting for.
All right, let me the list. We can, okay? And all the rest of the questions we can answer. So this is from 2247, Dr. Lazara, and if you want to read it yourself, it's easier. Has doctor interviewed other defendants in other cases and found them insane at the time of the offense?
The answer to your question is yes. Multiple times, actually.
Okay, that obviously answers your question, 2247, right?
Thank you.
Next question from juror 1179. How can 5 or 6 different experts come up with totally different diagnoses with the same evidence and, I'm not sure, blank monies?
Testimony.
Test monies?
Testimony.
Testimonies, oh, okay. I should have gotten that, with the same evidence of testimonies. Is it because of newer training and experience? Please explain.
Well, there's multiple different reasons for that. One of the different reasons, I believe, is that we're all trained differently. So that's one difference. The second, and I would have to go back to their reports, but I think that we did get different evidence in the case, a little bit different evidence. So I think that when you look at different things, you might come up with different ideas. Number 3, we all interviewed him at different times and for different lengths of time. So again, you're going to have different questions, and you may get different impressions based upon that, because the different reports are very different. So if the different reports are very different, then if they got different information, then that could lead them to have different conclusions. So I would say there's a lot of different reasons for that. Different data, different training, and different interviews.
Can I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The next question from 2248 is, in your opinion, the idea of saving the world show empathy?
The idea of saving the world, does it show empathy? If somebody actually genuinely thought they were saving the world by doing a behavior, I would say yes, that does show empathy. I don't believe that that was the case in this case, but yes.
From juror, does that answer your question?
Yes.
From juror 1179, is psychology an exact science question?
I would say psychology is not an exact science. Psychology, psychiatry, mental health in general, they're considered soft sciences, so there's not as much objective data, such as labs and different things like that, that can sort of guide our opinion. Yeah.
And if not, what is the acceptable margin of error?
That's a nice question. The acceptable margin of error. In a treatment context? It's a real hard question to answer. In a treatment context, as a clinician, I would say that the margin of error is to do the least amount of harm. That's the margin of error that I would say to go by. In a forensic evaluation, I would say the margin of error is, does the evidence support your findings?
Does that answer your question? My name's keeping this today.
Is there a percentage?
Yes.
Is there a percentage?
Or percentage of error?
Yeah, like 1 out of 20, 20%.
1 out of 20 what?
Like when you do a lab test or something,
Yes,
they always have a margin of error.
there's a range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're not, it's not completely true all the time. There's always a margin of error in any kind of lab.
That's right.
That applies.
That's a really great question. I would say that, for us, we have to look at the criteria and go based upon that, and that's why they have in these criteria that they meet a certain number out of a certain number. So they are allowing the margin for error there. If somebody has all the symptoms, then, the margin of error is small. If somebody has some of the symptoms, then the margin of error is bigger. But the DSM, the classifications, they allow for that room to do that. But there's not an exact number to that.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Juror number 2260. Number 1, you mentioned that John was on very low doses of his medication, 10 milligram Haldol, 20 milligram Seroquel. What is the normal dosage for someone being first prescribed those meds?
To be first prescribed those meds, well, it really depends, and that's another thing. You have to look at each person, their size, and then you have to look at the degree of symptoms that they have to determine what you're going to start and when you're going to start it and how you're going to start it. I would say for Seroquel, the starting dose of that to titrate is 200 milligrams twice per day. And the starting dose of Haldol is 10-15 milligrams. That's the starting dose. Vistaril starting dose 100 milligrams. Wellbutrin, the starting dose is 150 milligrams. Neurontin, the starting dose is 300 milligrams, depending upon what it's used for. And that's another thing. What is it used for? What is it being used for? And then you have to sort of go from there. And what are the level of symptoms? At the level of symptoms, he was on that amount of medication for an entire year. So that was not changed. So you're titrating it up depending upon the level of symptoms and if they're continuing. And then if they're still continuing, you increase the dose because you want to stop the symptoms from occurring. But these doses were on an entire year and then became symptom-free on those doses for an entire year. So that's how I looked at that.
Does that answer that question? Okay. 2, has he consistently been on the same dosage this entire time?
No. So that was the interesting thing and sort of why I brought it up, because when he had gone to the hospital the first time to get his competency restored, as I said, he was there for a year and he was on that same dose the entire year. Then he went back to the jail. They missed 2 morning doses of medication. 2 days of just the morning dose of medication. And then he became floridly psychotic again. That is not typical for psychosis. That doesn't happen. So that was something I noted. Then he went back to the state hospital again in that state. And now his medication doses are huge. So it just doesn't make logical sense. That's not usually how it works. That's why I noted that.
3, do any of these medications he is on give a comparable feeling to the illegal substances he was taking in the past?
You guys are brilliant. Seroquel is a medication that's commonly diverted in the correctional system. It's one of the reasons why they don't prescribe it in the correctional system without special permission, because it's diverted, and what that means is people use it for illicit effects rather than what they're used for or what they're prescribed for. They're actually, bartered for that medication, which is why it's no longer prescribed in the Department of Corrections. But so yes, to answer your question, yes, the Seroquel is one that's diverted, one that is used for that type of effect. Number 2, he's on clonazepam also, which is a sedative drug that is commonly used and commonly abused, Klonopin. And so he's also being prescribed that in the hospital as well.
And the next question from 2260, what is NGR training? And NGRI training?
NGRI training. Well, there isn't specific not guilty by reason of insanity training that I know of. In my fellowship, I was trained under my mentor on the different items involved in this assessment. And so that was my training over the course of a year in the fellowship. Not everybody has that training. Some people are just, again, grandfathered in. So they might have an interest in forensics, but they're not fellowship trained, and then they just start reading about it, reviewing it. They get hired in the first case, they do one, see how it goes, that kind of thing. So, I mean, that happens. Like I said before, different people have different training.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Oh. issues is limited, how big of a role does differential diagnosis play in reaching a diagnosis?
That's another good question. Well, a differential diagnosis is involved in every one of these assessments. And I don't know exactly when your question is, you're asking about, malingering testing or asking about certain psychological testing. Certain psychological testing is meant for diagnoses. Certain psychological testing is meant for evaluations of different things like malingering and things like that. It's all intertwined in a differential diagnosis. So I'm not too clear about what the question is really asking me. Can you ask it again, Judge?
Sure, you can read it.
Okay.
Who asked that? Okay, so that's number 2247. Yeah.
Since testing for mental health issues is limited, how big of a role does differential? When you're asking since testing for mental health issues is limited, are you meaning lab testing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How big a role does differential diagnosis, that's how we come up with a diagnosis. And then, as I said, we sort of systematically go through each one of those categories. And again, using the DSM and using our clinical judgment, you can determine, do they meet these criteria? And the criteria are pretty specific. Do they meet these criteria? And then for each of the diagnoses, they have exclusion criteria. And the exclusion criteria are, is this mental illness caused by a medical condition, or better explained, by a medical condition? And number two, is this person concurrently using drugs? Is this the exclusive effect of drugs versus mental illness? Another request that it makes, or condition, is, does this cause social and occupational dysfunction? That's the basic one. That's how you get a diagnosis or even an illness. It has to cause social and occupational dysfunction. So, and you go through each one of them, and as I said, and to your question of the level of error, they take that into account when they're making the criteria. So that's why it says, like, they only need to meet 3 of 7 criteria in order to get this diagnosis, or they only need to meet 4 of 9 criteria in order to get this diagnosis. So that's sort of how we go about doing it. But you have to do that. You have to sort of go through that process of elimination in order to come up with the actual diagnosis. So I would say that's my best answer to your question.
Thank you. Okay. Does John know what day and time you are going to interview him?
In my opinion, he knew when I was coming. I know when I looked at the hospital records, he knew when other people were coming. So he must have known when I was coming.
Okay, does that answer your question? All right. Judge Lazaro, can you give me the one you got?
Sure.
Thank you. How many are misdiagnosed on the average is their data?
Ooh. Psychiatric patients? Is that what you're asking? And it really depends upon where you're looking. I mean, you look at the data, and I don't have any research articles just on me because you just asked me that question. But in forensic context, there's a lot of different diagnoses than in clinical samples, and you'll see that. Because, as we've talked about, there's some secondary gain involved at times in forensic context versus clinical. So they have shown differences there. Out of 100 patients, how many are misdiagnosed? I actually was involved in a research study at USF to sort of design an instrument that anybody could use to come up with the same diagnosis. One of our professors had done that. He actually has one out. And I was involved in talking with everybody about the diagnosis. And everybody did different interviews with the same questions. So we were all given the same questions to ask, and then we were all asked to give the diagnosis. And there was not good iterator reliability among people. That different people have different visions about what certain symptoms are. And people see, based upon their knowledge, training, and experience, they see things differently sometimes. And I never really realized how different they were until I was involved in that study. So, for psychiatry specifically, I would say there's probably going to be a pretty big variance. It just depends upon the presentation every time. So that's my answer to that question.
Does that answer your question? Does anybody else have any other questions? Any lawyers have any follow-up?
I do.
Okay. I heard you.
Dr. Lazare, one of the questions I'd asked you about differential diagnosis.
Yes.
And that's the procedure that you discussed yesterday, or the process you used yesterday in ruling out bipolar disorder, correct?
Well, I mean, bipolar disorder was an option, and that wasn't how I ruled it out. I ruled it out because of medical causes were not, did not precipitate it, so I ruled it out due to that.
Okay. And you indicate that you ruled out bipolar because Mr. Jonchuck was prescribed Adderall, right?
Well, he's prescribed amphetamine.
No, I think this is outside scope of the juror's question.
He was prescribed Adderall, right?
Yeah, he's used
stimulant.
amphetamines and prescribed amphetamines, yeah.
And so your position is if somebody with bipolar is prescribed a stimulant, they're automatically going to be in some kind of manic state.
They automatically would fly into a manic state. Yep, it would take maybe 1 to 2 days.
Okay. And you left out the part, though, about Mr. Jonchuck also being prescribed a sedative at the same time.
He was prescribed clonidine as a child. That's not a sedative.
You're also aware that his uncle was administering Klonopin to him as well, correct?
I don't know that his uncle was administering Klonopin to him, but it doesn't matter. Even if he was getting Klonopin, he still would fly into a manic episode. I don't know how much Klonopin, unless he was giving him 20 milligrams or something, but he would still fly into a manic episode. And he hasn't always been prescribed clonazepam, but he's also abused stimulants throughout the years as well. So I would say, no, that would not affect my opinion at all.
Okay, so regardless of whether he's prescribed a stimulant versus prescribed a stimulant and a sedative, that would have no bearing on your opinion?
No, because the sedative is not strong enough to counteract the stimulant.
Regardless of the dosage? Because you don't know the dosage, right?
I don't know the dosage, but unless he was like totally snowed on Klonopin and totally sedated, I don't believe that it would be enough.
And I think one of the other questions you were asked if you had ever rendered the opinion that a defendant was not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yes.
You indicated a bunch of times, right?
Multiple times. The last one was last year in August. Yep.
Okay. You've actually done so 3 times in your entire career?
I don't know if it's only been 3 times.
Well, you were asked about it in deposition, right?
In this deposition?
Yes, ma'am.
Possibly. I'm sure that I have if you're asking me that question.
If it would it help refresh your recollection to review what you indicated at that time?
Yeah, you could tell me which page it is.
Page 24. It's kind of the whole starting.
You asked me if I'm sorry. You asked me if I had, and I said there have been a couple of them, and you asked me what are they, and I told you one, which is the one I just told you guys about. And then you asked if there's others, and I said there are others, but not too many, because it's a very small portion of cases. I don't recall the names, and I don't recall the name or remember the name of the person.
Okay. And then you went on to list 3 other people that you could recall ever rendering that opinion in, right?
Okay, yeah. Then I went, you asked me what county or what were the facts generally, and then I sort of went through some of the cases that I recalled right off the top of my head. And I don't know if there was 3 cases. I see 1.
Maybe one was the same one you're talking about on the other page?
No. No, that wasn't the same one. I said there was one with a man who killed somebody with a hammer, and another guy. Yeah. Yeah.
So 3 total?
Those are right off the top of my head. I'd have to go back into my reports to find that out, but only 1% of cases actually are NGRI. So if I've done 100, the fact that if I said I did 3, that's more than 1. So that's higher than that number.
In one of those cases that you testified to under oath, you indicated under oath that you found the individual who had killed the homeless man in front of the church in Tampa, that you found that man insane, right?
What was the number, the page number?
Mr. Marston, page 25.
Page 25. I have said another one where a guy had killed a homeless man in front of a church, yes.
And in fact, you actually, in that case, your opinion was actually that he was sane, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually just got the report. So I said that he was sane because he was under the influence of substance. But in terms of the actual illness, I believe that he was psychotic at the time. It was due to substance. Yeah.
So you would agree with that when you testified under oath that you found him insane, that was not true?
Yes.
Okay. And you also just testified that Mr. Jonchuck was on the same medication at the same doses for over a year.
Well, for the year that he was there the first time in the hospital, he was on the same doses, 10, 20, 100.
Okay.
And then when he moved over, it increased the second hospitalization.
Let me ask you this.
Right.
If the testimony and records were to actually show that that dose had been increased over time and had not stayed the same over a year, would that change any of your opinions?
Well, I would like to see that it changed.
Nothing further.
Any questions from the state?
Is that a moment?
Sure.
There you go.
So Dr. Lazaro be on standby. Thank you for your testimony, Dr. Lazaro.
Thank you, Judge.
Hey, we have a question?
of the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you.